In May 2010, Qatar bought Harrods. Not a stake in Harrods, not a licensing deal, the whole thing. Every floor, every gold food hall counter, every doorman. The most famous department store in Britain, sold for £1.5 billion to a country most of the people shopping there that morning could not have found on a map. And Harrods was just a Tuesday. Right now, without knowing it, there is a reasonable chance that the supermarket where you buy your groceries, the airport you fly from, the bank that holds your savings, and the football club you watch on a Saturday are all, at least partially, owned by a country of 300,000 citizens on a strip of desert in the Persian Gulf. This video is about how that happened. How a country that had nothing, and I mean nothing, built one of the most powerful financial weapons in the world, and what it is quietly using that weapon to buy. Before we get to the fund, we need to understand what Qatar was before the money arrived, because understanding how far it has come is what makes the scale of what it has built genuinely startling. In 1950, Qatar was a pearl diving economy on a strip of desert. Tens of thousands of inhabitants, no paved roads, no university, no hospital worth naming. Its neighbors had more resources, more people, more military weight, and more history. Qatar had none of it. Then oil was discovered. And after oil, something far more valuable. The world's third largest reserves of natural gas, sitting under the shallow waters of the North Field off Qatar's coast. A reserve so enormous that geologists initially suspected the estimates were wrong. The question was whether Qatar would manage that windfall the way most resource-rich small states had, spending it as fast as it arrived, building infrastructure, subsidizing citizens, and watching it drain away when the commodity cycle turned. Every neighboring country had done exactly that at some point. Some were still doing it. By 2006, just 10 years after its first LNG export, Qatar had overtaken Malaysia as the world's largest LNG exporter. And in the years that followed, particularly after Russia's invasion of Ukraine drove European buyers into emergency long-term supply contracts, Qatar's gas export revenues surged to $132 billion in a single year. For a country of 3 million people, that is more than $40,000 per person in export revenue alone, in 12 months. The question of what to do with that money had become the most consequential question in the country's history. Here is where the story gets important for anyone watching, because the answer Qatar gave to that question is the reason its money is now embedded in the everyday infrastructure of countries on the other side of the planet. If they had answered it differently, you would not be living inside their portfolio. The Qatar Investment Authority was established in 2005. Its mandate? Convert surplus gas revenues into a permanent pool of capital, invested globally across every major asset class, designed to outlast the gas itself. The model had precedent. Norway had built its government pension fund on North Sea oil. Abu Dhabi had done the same. But what made QIA different was its ambition relative to its size. Qatar's population was, and remains, a fraction of its Gulf neighbors. Its land area is smaller than Yorkshire. In the first 9 months of 2024, sovereign funds from Abu Dhabi, Saudi Arabia, and Qatar made up 40% of the value of all deals done by global state-backed investors. Qatar, the smallest of that group by population, by a significant margin, was writing checks at the same table as states with 10 times its citizens. The fund employs around 650 people. 650 people managing more than $500 billion. Goldman Sachs employs 45,000. The gas revenues did not disappear into roads and palaces, as they had in so many comparable states. They were redirected into a machine designed to generate returns permanently. A machine that, 2 decades later, has made Qatar's financial reach vastly larger than its geography or its population would ever suggest possible. Now, this is the part that most people watching this have no idea about. And the reason it matters is that QIA does not publish its full portfolio. By design. You are not supposed to know the extent of it. But between regulatory filings, deal announcements, and financial reporting, enough has come out to build a picture. And if you live in Europe, particularly Britain, that picture is considerably more personal than you probably realize. If this kind of breakdown is useful to you, subscribing takes 2 seconds, and it means you get the next one without having to go looking for it. Anyway, Qatar's investments in the UK alone total more than £40 billion. That figure covers the HSBC Tower, the Shard, the Olympic Village, Harrods, the Savoy Hotel, shares in Canary Wharf, 22% of Sainsbury's, 20% of Heathrow Airport, a 5.9% stake in Barclays, and 10.3% of the London Stock Exchange. In Germany, significant stakes in Volkswagen Group, Porsche, and Hochtief, one of the world's largest construction companies. In France, stakes in Total, LVMH, Lagardère, and Paris Saint-Germain Football Club. A registered address at 52 Champs-Élysées. In the United States, QIA's portfolio exceeded $45 billion as of early 2024, spanning real estate, port infrastructure, healthcare, and technology. In May 2025, the fund pledged to invest $500 billion in the US economy over the next decade. In 20 years, a sovereign wealth fund that did not exist in 2004 had become embedded in the ownership structure of 6 continents. The supermarket, the airport, the bank, the football club, the skyscraper. None of it advertised. All of it deliberate. What QIA owns is one thing. How it decides what to buy, and what happens when those decisions fail, is where the real story of the fund's evolution sits. Because if you think a $500 billion fund has simply made a sequence of brilliant calls, you would be wrong. And the mistakes it made forced a rethink that reshaped where this money flows today. QIA's European strategy in its early years was built on large, concentrated positions in single blue-chip names. It worked until it didn't. Volkswagen. QIA held roughly 17% of the company, making it the 3rd largest shareholder. In 2015, Volkswagen was caught cheating on diesel emissions tests in what became known as Dieselgate. The share price fell 52% from its peak. QIA's stake, worth billions, collapsed with it. Glencore followed a similar path. QIA held around 9% of the commodities giant. When global metals prices fell sharply in 2015 and Glencore's debt load became a serious concern, its shares dropped nearly 50% from their peak. 2 of the fund's largest European positions had each lost roughly half their value within the same window. The losses forced a strategic review. QIA shifted away from concentrated direct bets on individual European industrials, began placing more capital with external asset managers, and pushed aggressively into Asia and technology. In 2024, it established its first venture capital fund of funds, $1 billion deployed into startups and VC firms, later extended by a further $2 billion in early 2026. A fund built to manage gas revenues had become, through failure and adaptation, a global technology investor. The mistakes made in Wolfsburg and London shaped where the next generation of capital went. None of the assets we've covered are purely financial bets. And this is the part that most explainers miss entirely. Because if you only look at QIA as an investment vehicle, you misread what it is actually for. Understanding the real purpose behind the spending changes how you see everything Qatar has done. Qatar has 300,000 citizens. It sits between Saudi Arabia and Iran. It shares a gas field with Iran, the largest in the world, and for 17 years, until 2021, was under an economic blockade imposed by its Gulf neighbors. Its conventional military is not a serious deterrent against any of the larger powers around it. So what does a country of that size, in that position, actually use as its security architecture? The answer is the fund. When Barclays needed emergency capital during the 2008 financial crisis, Qatar provided it. Qatar Holdings' stake in Barclays rose to 12.7% during that capital raising. That was not a passive financial decision. It was bilateral. Capital in exchange for deepened strategic ties with one of Britain's largest banks, at precisely the moment when Britain needed to know who its friends were. Paris Saint-Germain was an obscure Parisian club before Qatar bought it in 2011. Today, it is one of the 5 most recognized football brands on earth, with Qatar Airways on its shirt and Doha in its promotional footage. Qatar spent roughly 400 million euros on Neymar alone in 2017, the single most expensive transfer in football history at the time. The return on that investment was never meant to be measured in ticket sales. It was measured in the number of people in Brazil, France, and across the world who now associate Qatar with world-class ambition. It was measured in diplomatic relationships, trade access, and the soft credibility a tiny Gulf state accumulates when the largest economies on earth have a financial stake in its stability. This is what sovereign wealth funds do at their most sophisticated. They are not simply investment vehicles. They are instruments of national strategy, capital deployed in service of relationships, visibility, and security that no military could purchase. For a country with 300,000 citizens in one of the most volatile regions on Earth, with no conventional deterrent and gas reserves that will eventually run out, the fund is not a financial product. It is the country's foreign policy, executed in the currency markets of London, Paris, Berlin, and New York. Qatar has less than 300,000 citizens, no permanent seat on the UN Security Council, an army that is not a credible conventional force against any of its neighbors. It owns the building where you shop, part of the airport where you fly, a stake in the bank that processes your mortgage, shares in the exchange where your pension is invested, and the football club half of Europe watches on a Saturday. It did all of that in 20 years, with a fund that did not exist before 2005, by converting gas revenues into permanent capital before the gas runs out. The gas will run out. The fund is designed to outlast it. Qatar built its financial reach on gas, a natural resource that gave it the revenues to start. But there is a country on the other side of the continent that built something just as dominant, with no gas, no oil, no natural resources of any kind. It did it by getting to one piece of European financial legislation before anyone else did, and then spending 40 years making itself impossible to displace. Today, 70% of every cross-border fund distributed across Europe is domiciled there. And the deals that made it work, the secret tax arrangements with Amazon, IKEA, Disney, and 340 other corporations that the EU's own president had signed off on, were exposed by a single accountant who walked out of his office with 28,000 documents on a disk. That video will show you exactly how a landlocked country of 660,000 people became the second largest investment fund hub on Earth, and what it has been quietly costing Germany, France, and Britain for decades. It is on this channel right now.